The world likes to pretend its history is complete, mapped, measured, explained. But beneath everything we think we know lies another layer entirely. A shadow world made of disappearances, impossible events, and stories that refuse to stay buried. These are the mysteries that historians avoid, scientists can't decode, and witnesses never forget. Some are whispers, some are warnings, and some are doors we were never meant to open. Tonight we open one. Welcome to CurioBox. If you're new here, this is where we explore the true mysteries, the ones that linger long after the facts run out. Let me know where you're watching from and take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps us know when to reach you and how many of you are following the trail. Now let's begin with a disappearance so complete, so silent, and so impossible that after more than 400 years, not a single explanation fits. The lost colony of Roanoke. It began as England's dream, to build their first permanent colony in the New World. In 1587, over 100 settlers arrived on Roanoke Island. Men, women, children, including Eleanor Dare, who soon gave birth to her daughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America. They built homes, farmed, and tried to survive. But isolation crushed them quickly. Supplies ran low, relations with nearby tribes grew tense. So Governor John White, Eleanor's father, sailed back to England for help. He promised to return in a few months. He didn't return for 3 years. War trapped him overseas, storms blocked his passage, and by the time he finally returned to Roanoke in 1590, the colony was gone. Not abandoned, not destroyed, gone. No bodies, no tools, no signs of struggle, just empty land, as if the settlement had never existed. The only clue was a single word carved into a wooden post. Croatoan White believed it meant the colonists had moved to Croatoan Island, home of a friendly tribe. But before he could investigate, a violent storm forced him back to sea. He never returned. He died without answers, and the mystery remained. Over the centuries, explanations piled up. Some believe hostile tribes wiped out the settlers, but there were no bones, no ashes, no evidence of violence. Others say they starved or fled into the woods. But that doesn't explain why the houses were dismantled carefully, not destroyed. Some think they sailed for England and sank. Yet not a single piece of wreckage was ever found. It was as if the colony erased itself. Then came the unsettling legends told by local tribes. Stories of a being that lived deep in the forests. Something ancient, something that mimicked human voices and lured people away. A creature they claimed could make entire groups vanish, leaving nothing behind but a carved mark to warn others. A mark left on wood? To historians, these stories are myths. But myths don't swallow 115 people without a trace. Modern science added new layers to the mystery. Tree ring data revealed that Roanoke suffered the worst drought in 800 years. A disaster that would have left the colony desperate. Archaeologists found scattered English artifacts miles inland, hinting that some settlers survived, but only some. The rest, no one knows. Even stranger, the word Croatoan appears in other mysteries across history. Carved into Poe's bedpost before his death, written in the log of a deserted ship, scribbled in the final notes of people who disappeared. A word tied repeatedly to vanishing. Coincidence or something older than we understand? New excavations show no mass graves. No signs of disease, no war, nothing suggesting chaos. Instead, it looks like the colony left in an orderly manner, dismantling their homes, packing their belongings, moving as a group. But to where, and why is there no record of them anywhere? Some researchers believe the colonists integrated with tribes, a theory supported by later genetic studies. But integration wouldn't explain why the entire settlement was stripped clean, or why not a single colonist ever reappeared in English records. Others suggest a darker possibility, that the settlers split into groups, each meeting a different fate. One absorbed by tribes, one lost to disease, one erased by the wilderness. But this still leaves a haunting gap. Dozens of people who left behind nothing. Not even bones. And then there are the stranger theories. Secret voyages, hidden locations, supernatural intervention. Some claim the colonists encountered something they weren't meant to see. Something that silenced them before word could spread. Whatever happened, one truth remains. Roanoke is the oldest unsolved disappearance in American history. A colony that walked into the New World and never walked out. And after 4 centuries, the silence of Roanoke feels less like the absence of evidence and more like the echo of something deliberately concealed. They appeared in the fields without warning, two small figures standing at the edge of a deep pit near the village of Woolpit, England. It was the 12th century, a time when superstition lived alongside everyday life, but even then, nothing prepared the villagers for what they found. The children were terrified, clinging to each other, whispering in a language no one recognized. Their clothes were strangely made, woven from a fabric unknown in the region. They looked human, except for one impossible detail. Their skin was green, not sickly, not pale. Green, like leaves under sunlight, like something born from the forest rather than two frightened children shaking in the open fields. No one knew how long they had been there. No one knew where they came from. And no one knew how children could appear out of thin air beside a wolf pit, a trap built for animals, not humans. They were brought into the village carefully, watched closely, spoken to softly. But the children would not eat. Everything offered to them, bread, meat, vegetables. They pushed away in fear, until a group of villagers brought in freshly picked beans still in their stalks. The children rushed toward them, desperate, devouring them raw. It was the first clue that something about their world, wherever it was, and did not match ours. Slowly, the villagers earned their trust. The children began to adapt. The boy grew sickly and eventually died, but the girl, stronger, brighter, more curious, survived. As she healed, she learned English, and with language came the answers no one expected. She told them she came from a place she called St. Martin's Land, a world where the sun never shone. Everything was twilight, everything was dim. The light was like the last moment before dusk, stretching endlessly. Her people, she said, all had green skin. When asked how she and her brother reached Woolpit, her answers became stranger. She said they were tending their father's livestock when they heard a sound, a deep resonant ringing, like a great bell or a metal drum echoing underground. They followed the sound into a cavern, walked deeper and deeper, until they saw a blinding river of light. They stepped forward and suddenly found themselves in the fields of Woolpit, the sun above them brighter than anything they had ever seen. The girl claimed that once she felt the sun on her skin, her green color began to fade, slowly changing to a natural human tone as she adjusted to her new world. But the most haunting detail of her story was the one she could not explain. She insisted Woolpit was not the world she came from. Not another village, not another country. Another world. Medieval records describe her story in careful detail. Chroniclers wrote it down with confusion and caution. Not like a fairy tale, but like something that genuinely happened. Something they struggled to categorize. Some believed the children were the survivors of a hidden community living underground, nourished by minerals that tinted their skin. Others claimed they were Flemish refugees who had lost their way, their strange clothing and unknown tongue marking them as outsiders. But those explanations crumble under scrutiny. No Flemish groups wore anything resembling their clothing. No known illness causes green skin that fades with sunlight, and no group of refugees could appear miles inland without a trail, without belongings, without a sign of how they crossed rivers, forests, and fortified borders. Then there's the cave. The tunnel the girl described with impossible precision, claiming it connected her twilight world to this one. No such cavern has ever been found. No records mention anything like it. And yet, the description matches folklore found all over Europe. Stories of hidden lands beneath ours, places where the light never rises, where time flows differently, where children sometimes wander out by accident. Fairy stories or memories of something older. The girl grew up in Woolpit. She integrated, worked, lived, and even married. But she never retracted her story. Until her death, she insisted she came from a world beside ours. Not above it, not beyond it, beside it. A world that looked like dusk. A world that sounded like bells under the earth. A world connected to ours by pathways we've forgotten how to find. And the boy, her brother, who died before he could speak, carried secrets to his grave that we will never recover. Some mysteries leave clues, others leave theories. But the green children of Woolpit leave us with something far more unsettling. The idea that sometimes the borders between worlds don't disappear, they simply shift. And when they do, something slips through. It should have been an ordinary patrol, A slow, steady sweep over the San Francisco coastline on a quiet Sunday morning in 1942. The United States was deep into World War II, and the Navy's L-8 Blimp was assigned to search the waters for enemy submarines. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. Just a routine flight crewed by two experienced men, Lieutenant Ernest Cody and Ensign Charles Adams. They lifted off from Treasure Island at 6:03 a.m., the fog heavy but manageable. Radio reports were calm, no signs of stress. No engine trouble, no enemy vessels, just two men floating above the Pacific, following a flight path they had taken dozens of times before. Then somewhere over the open water, something went wrong. At 7:42 a.m., Cody radioed in one final message, investigating a possible oil slick. Those were the last words anyone ever heard from the crew of L-8. Minutes passed, then hours. Other aircraft called out to them. No reply. The blimp drifted silently back toward land, but no one knew it yet. Fishermen off the coast of Daly City looked up in confusion as the massive silver balloon passed overhead, low enough to nearly touch the waves, and completely silent. More witnesses spotted it moving inland, slumped, sagging, drifting aimlessly like a creature that had lost its soul. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The blimp finally scraped the rooftops of a small neighborhood, struck a telephone pole, and collapsed into the street in a hiss of fabric and escaping helium. Within minutes, firefighters and Navy personnel rushed to the scene. And that's when the mystery revealed itself. The gondola, the cabin where Cody and Adams should have been, was empty. The controls were intact. The radio was working. The life raft was still on board. The parachutes were still in their cases. The engine was functional. The cabin door was latched open, not ripped, not forced, just gently unlatched, the way one might open a door to step out for a moment. But both men were gone. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no damage, no footprints around the crash site. No bodies found along the entire coast. It was as if the two crewmen had simply stepped out into thin air at 2,000 feet. The Navy launched a full investigation. Every possibility was considered and dismissed. If the men had jumped, they would have been found. If they had fought, the cabin would show it. If they had been taken by another vessel or aircraft, radar and visual reports would show something. But there was nothing. Witnesses reported the blimp descending slowly, peacefully, as though piloted by ghosts. And yet, the strangest detail wasn't what the investigators found. It was what they didn't. Cody and Adams were equipped with standard-issue life vests. Neither vest was missing. Neither man had taken supplies. Neither had tried to send a distress call. Whatever happened must have been sudden. So sudden that two trained Navy officers abandoned their post in mid-flight without grabbing a single survival tool. Some theorists believe one man fell out while checking something outside the cabin, and the other jumped in a desperate attempt to save him. But the physics don't match. The L-8 door opened inward, making accidental falls nearly impossible. Others suspect enemy involvement, a Japanese submarine surfacing and capturing the men. But no sub was seen, detected, or recorded anywhere near the area, and pulling off such an operation under a drifting blimp would be almost impossible. Then there is the theory most people whisper but rarely say out loud, that the crew saw something above or below the blimp, that made them act without thinking, abandoning the cabin in panic or awe. A flash, a figure, a shape in the fog, something unexpected enough to override all military training. Whatever they saw, whatever happened in those final minutes, the sky kept its secret. After the incident, the L-8 gondola was repaired and put back into service, later becoming part of Goodyear's commercial fleet. Spectators would look up at it during sports events, never realizing they were watching the same aircraft involved in one of aviation's most chilling mysteries. But inside the restored cabin, one detail remained unchanged: the plaque listing the names of the two men who vanished without a trace. To this day, their disappearance remains unsolved. No wreckage, no bodies, no answers, just a blimp drifting home without its crew. If you're still watching, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Every click helps keep these mysteries alive. High in the Indian Himalayas, nearly 16,000 feet above sea level, lies a frozen lake so isolated that most people will never stand near it. No villages surround it, no shelters. No roads, only wind, ice, and an overwhelming silence broken only by the shifting snow. Locals warn travelers to stay away. They call it Roopkund, but the world knows it as Skeleton Lake. Because when summer warmth briefly melts its frozen surface, the lake reveals a sight almost too eerie to believe. Hundreds of human skeletons lying beneath the water and scattered along the shore, their skulls staring upward as if caught in a final moment of terror. Bones tangled together, artifacts frozen in the mud, a mass death no one can fully explain. The modern discovery came in 1942, when a British patrol unit crossed the region and stumbled upon the remains. At first, they feared they had found soldiers, possibly Japanese troops sneaking across the mountains during World War II. But the truth was far older. The bones belonged to people who had died centuries earlier, and not just a handful of them, but entire groups: men, women, and children. Their clothing was still preserved in some areas, along with rings, tools, and leather footwear. Yet none of these clues revealed who they were, or why they were there. Worse, Roopkund is not a place where anyone should travel casually. The terrain is brutal, oxygen is thin, and temperatures can drop low enough to freeze exposed skin within minutes. So what force brought so many people, some from faraway lands, to a high-altitude lake with no purpose and no shelter? DNA testing made the mystery even stranger. Some skeletons belonged to local Himalayan populations, but others came from thousands of miles away. Their genetic markers matched Mediterranean ancestry, Greece, Crete, and lands along the eastern Mediterranean coast. How could Mediterranean travelers centuries ago end up dead together in one of the world's most dangerous mountain regions? The cause of death deepened the riddle further. Most of the skulls displayed massive, round impact injuries, crushing blows to the head and shoulders. But there were no weapons, no signs of battle, no defensive wounds, no mass burial rituals. It was as if something struck them from above. Local legends had whispered about this for generations, that a group of travelers once angered the mountain goddess Nanda Devi, who punished them by raining stones as hard as iron from the sky. For decades, historians dismissed this as just folklore, until modern forensic analysis revealed that the injuries were consistent with something astonishing: a sudden, violent hailstorm, producing hailstones the size of baseballs or even larger. Hailstones heavy enough to crush a skull. In a barren, treeless valley with nowhere to hide, such a storm would be deadly. And if a large group was caught in the open, they could be wiped out within minutes. It was a chilling explanation, but it solved only part of the mystery. Because Roopkund holds not one mass death event, but two. Radiocarbon dating revealed that one group died around the 9th century, another died 1,000 years later. Two unrelated groups, two separate tragedies. Both struck down in the same cursed valley. Artifacts found among the dead included wooden staffs, iron spearheads, jewelry, and even musical instruments. One skeleton belonged to a person who carried a traditional drum, still partly intact after centuries of freezing preservation. Who brings a drum into one of the most lethal terrains in the Himalayas? Unless these expeditions weren't random. Unless they had a purpose, ritual, pilgrimage, or something lost to history. Even now, no single theory explains everything. If it was a pilgrimage, why did people of Mediterranean descent join? If it was a trade route, why is there no historical record of its existence? If these were isolated accidents, why did both tragedies happen in the exact same location? Some researchers think Roopkund was part of an ancient spiritual trail. Others argue it was a way station for forgotten mountain tribes. A few entertain more speculative ideas: a ritual site, a celestial observatory, or a place of sacrifice that drew people across nations. But the lake remains silent. Every summer it gives up its dead, and every winter the snow buries them again. The bones linger in the thin air, untouched for centuries, watching over a valley where the wind never stops. And still no one knows why hundreds of people, separated by time, culture, and geography, took their final breaths on the shore of a hidden lake carved into the roof of the world. Roopkund remains one of Earth's most chilling archaeological puzzles, a place where history, folklore, and death intersect in a mystery that refuses to fade. Before April 1986, the workers at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant spoke of something they couldn't quite explain. It began quietly. Small reports, whispered conversations in break rooms, nervous glances at the dark air above Reactor 4. And though no one wrote anything official, enough people mentioned it that the story survived. They called it the Black Bird. It wasn't a literal bird, at least not in the way anyone recognized. Witnesses described a winged figure, enormous, silent, with eyes that glowed like burning coals. It hovered near the towers, circled the cooling ducts, or perched at impossible heights where birds shouldn't be able to rest. Some workers said it looked like a giant shadow. Others said it was shaped like a man with wings. A few refused to describe it at all, but the most unsettling part wasn't what they saw. It was what they heard. Those who encountered the blackbird reported the same symptoms: sudden migraines, dizziness, a pressure behind the eyes, and nightmares that pulled them awake, drenched in sweat. Phone calls with no one speaking, whispers that stopped when the receiver hit the hook. Dreams of fire, always fire, consuming metal and sky. At first, the sightings were dismissed as exhaustion. The night shift workers in particular were known to push their limits. But then the reports became more frequent and more consistent. Engineers, security guards, maintenance crews, people who didn't know each other, described the same impossible figure watching them from above the reactor. And then came the warnings. A handful of employees claimed they received strange phone calls days before the disaster. No voice, just static, and beneath it something like a distant roaring wind. One operator swore he heard someone whisper his name through the noise. Another said the call ended with what sounded like wings flapping. When they brought it to management, they were told to forget it. Superstition, fatigue, imagination. But when the reactor exploded on April 26th, every surviving witness remembered the blackbird. After the blast lit up the sky, after the smoke turned the air metallic, after radiation poured into the wind, several of the emergency responders swore they saw a dark shape rising through the flames, like a silhouette carried upward by the heat. Some said it flew toward the forest and vanished. Others said it hovered over the burning reactor as if witnessing the destruction it had foreseen. And then, no one saw it again. Not once in the aftermath, not during cleanup, not in the years that followed. Whether it was hallucination, shared trauma, or something older, something that appears only at the edge of catastrophe, no one knows. Folklorists later pointed out the similarities between the blackbird and the ancient Slavic creature known as the fire demon, a winged omen said to appear before great disasters. Others compared it to the Mothmen of Point Pleasant, another figure said to precede tragedy. But even today, the most compelling part of the legend isn't the sightings, it's the pattern. Because workers at the Fukushima nuclear plant reported something eerily similar in the weeks before their own disaster. Shadowy wings against the floodlights, strange phone calls, and overwhelming feelings of dread. And in several major industrial accidents worldwide, there are scattered reports, always unofficial, always whispered, of the same dark silhouette appearing beforehand, watching silently. Is it mass hysteria, coincidence, a psychological reaction to stress? Or is it something else entirely? Something drawn to catastrophe or warning of it? We'll never know what the people of Chernobyl truly saw, or whether the blackbird was real. But the timing, the consistency, and the way the sighting stopped the moment the reactor exploded continue to unsettle historians and investigators to this day. Some say it was an omen. Some say it was a messenger. Others believe it was simply watching, waiting for what it already knew was coming. Because if the legends are true, the blackbird doesn't cause disasters. It arrives before them, and sometimes, and that's an even more terrifying thought. It began quietly, the way most tragedies do. Just small, strange things no one paid attention to. In the winter of 1878, in a modest wooden house in Amherst, Nova Scotia, a 14-year-old girl named Esther Cox fell ill after a terrifying incident. A man attempted to assault her, leaving her traumatized and shaken to her core. She survived, but something else seemed to come home with her. A few weeks later, the disturbances began. At first, her family heard light scratching beneath the bed, like mice clawing at wood. Then the sounds grew louder, sharper, until the entire frame trembled violently as if gripped by invisible hands. Esther would sit frozen, terrified, insisting she felt something moving in the room, watching her. Then one night, a deafening bang thundered through the house, a gunshot-like crack that shook dishes on the shelves. Everyone searched, but nothing had fallen. Nothing was broken. The sound had come from nowhere, and it only got worse. Objects began flying through the air. Clothes were torn apart by unseen claws. Furniture moved. A heavy chest lifted itself and slammed onto the floor so hard the neighbors thought the house was collapsing. As the family watched in horror, the bed Esther slept on rose from the ground, shaking violently as if a storm had formed beneath it. Then came the writing. On the wall behind Esther's headboard, jagged letters scratched themselves into the plaster. Esther Cox, you are mine to kill. The Cox family fled the room, but wherever Esther went, the disturbances followed. Knocking, explosions, fires bursting from empty corners of the house. 11 separate fires ignited out of thin air, scorching the walls, and all the while Esther screamed that she could feel something beside her. Cold, angry, whispering. Soon the case exploded into one of the most documented paranormal events in Canadian history. Doctors examined her, priests prayed over her. Investigators slept in the same room, taking notes as blankets were ripped off, pillows shredded, and objects hurled across the floor with inhuman force. One night, before witnesses, needles launched themselves into Esther's flesh, stabbing her repeatedly as she cried out in pain. Another night, a large carving knife rose from the table, hovered, and plunged into the floorboards at her feet. People accused Esther of faking it, until the mayor, a doctor, and multiple townspeople saw the events with their own eyes. She wasn't in control, she wasn't acting. Something was using her. A local man named John Teed invited Esther to stay with his family, hoping to protect her. But the moment she stepped inside, their house became a war zone. Banging, shaking, flying objects, fires. Teed eventually kicked her out after a pocket knife floated across the room and stabbed itself into the table right in front of him. Wherever Esther went, the phenomenon followed. It was as if she had become a magnet for something furious, unseen, and intelligent. Eventually, a man named Walter Hubble, a professional actor turned paranormal investigator, moved into the Cox home for months, documenting everything he witnessed. His detailed accounts, signed and sworn by Amherst residents, became one of the most comprehensive poltergeist records in history. But even Hubble couldn't stop what happened next. Esther was arrested, accused of starting one of the mysterious fires. She spent a month in jail, during which the activity slowed, but didn't completely stop. Some believed the entity was weakening. Others believed it simply lost interest. By 1880, the phenomena gradually faded. Esther moved away, married, and lived the rest of her life quietly. But she always insisted on one thing. The spirit was real and it tried to kill her. To this day, no one knows what truly happened inside that small Nova Scotia home. Trauma-induced psychokinesis, a violent haunting, collective hysteria, or something darker, something that latched onto a wounded girl and fed on her fear. Whatever it was, it left behind more witnesses, more documentation, and more physical evidence than almost any haunting in North American history. And the strangest part? Some modern paranormal researchers claim the house still feels wrong, as if something lingers there waiting for someone like Esther. Next, we leave the shadows of a haunted house and look up, far beyond Earth, into the quiet darkness of deep space, where scientists detected a narrow band signal from a region no star exists. A signal that came again and again before disappearing forever. It began on a quiet Sunday night, November 22, 1987, when televisions across Chicago suddenly flickered, glitched, and then slipped into something no one had ever seen before. Sports fans were watching the evening news on WGN Channel 9. Nothing unusual. The Bears had just beaten the Lions, and anchor Dan Roan was recapping the highlights. Then, without warning, the screen froze. A sharp buzzing filled the speakers. Horizontal lines sliced across the broadcast. And for 5 long seconds, millions of viewers sat confused. Then the image changed. A figure appeared, and a man wearing a plastic Max Headroom mask, the iconic 1980s AI TV character. Behind him, a sheet of corrugated metal spun slowly, as if someone had awkwardly tried to imitate the digital background from the show. The figure leaned forward, no words, just silent, jerky movements. The distorted buzzing continued, making the moment feel more like a transmission from another world than a prank. And then, as quickly as it started, WGN regained control. The sports broadcast returned. The anchor looked shaken, unsure what had just happened. But the nightmare wasn't over. 2 hours later, a different channel, PBS station WTTW, was airing Doctor Who. And this time, whoever hijacked the signal was prepared. At 11:15 p.m., the screen warped again. The doctor vanished, and Max Headroom returned. This time, he spoke. A warped, metallic voice bled through, too distorted to fully understand. He referenced TV shows, mocked sports announcers, recited fragmented lines with eerie enthusiasm, and moved in fast, erratic motions, as if glitching in real time. Behind him, the corrugated metal spun, casting strange shifting shadows. No one knew where he was. No one knew who he was. And no one, absolutely no one, should have had the ability to hijack a major television broadcast in 1987. It wasn't just illegal, it was nearly impossible. You would need specialized equipment, expert knowledge of broadcast frequencies, and physical proximity to the transmission towers. And whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. The intrusion only lasted 90 seconds. Then it ended with a bizarre, unsettling moment. The masked figure being swatted by another person holding a fly swatter. And the screen went black, the broadcast returned. The station could do nothing but apologize. To this day, no one has ever been caught. The FBI, the FCC, local police, everyone launched an investigation. Engineers combed through signal logs. Technicians studied radio interference patterns. But despite all the resources, they found nothing. No location, no identity, no motive. Theories exploded. Some believed it was a group of engineering students testing their skills. Others believed it was a rogue broadcast technician with access to equipment no civilian should have. But then came the darker theories. Some speculated the transmission wasn't meant for the public, but was a coded message to someone else. A signal disguised as chaos. Others insisted the distorted voice held hidden instructions, encrypted phrases masked beneath glitches and static. And then there were the explanations that drifted beyond the boundaries of reason. Those who said the broadcast didn't originate from Earth at all. Because the strangest part remains this. Even with modern digital systems, hacking a live TV broadcast is nearly impossible. Yet somehow, in 1987, someone overrode two major networks with nothing but analog equipment and complete confidence. Whoever it was, they knew how to vanish. No fingerprints, no equipment found. No suspects identified, just a 90-second message broadcast to millions. From a masked figure with no name. A ghost in the signal, a glitch in reality, a moment that should have been impossible, yet happened anyway. Some stories settle into the mind like a whisper. Soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. The tale of the Pollock Twins is one of them. A story many dismiss as coincidence, yet others see as the closest thing to proof that consciousness doesn't end when the body does. In the quiet town of Hexham, England, Florence and John Pollock were raising two daughters, Joanna, age 11, and her little sister Jacqueline, age 6. The girls were inseparable, full of energy, curiosity, and that rare kind of sibling bond that feels older than the children themselves. But in May of 1957, everything changed. A speeding car struck both girls on their walk to church, killing them instantly. The small community mourned with the family, but no one felt the loss more deeply than their parents. Florence withdrew into grief. John clung to a strange belief that he had voiced for years, that souls do not simply vanish, that they return. And a year later, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. Doctors said she was carrying a single child, but John insisted she would have twins. He was right. In October 1958, twin girls were born, Jennifer and Jillian. From the moment the twins arrived, tiny details began to unsettle the grieving parents. Jennifer had a birthmark on her waist, exactly where Jacqueline once had one. She also had a mark near her forehead, matching another of Jacqueline's old scars. Jillian, the older twin by minutes, showed traits more like Joanna, quieter, watchful, almost protective of her sister. But strange coincidences can be dismissed until they begin to multiply. When the twins were 3, the family moved back to Hexham. They had never been there before, not in this lifetime. Yet as Florence led them through the town for the first time, both girls pointed out landmarks with unsettling accuracy. "That's the school we went to," Jillian said. "That's our favorite playground," Jennifer added. Florence froze. The girls were pointing toward places Joanna and Jacqueline used to visit. But it didn't stop there. A family friend once brought over a box of the deceased sister's old toys, items the twins had never seen. Immediately, Jennifer and Jillian began assigning ownership. "That was mine," Jillian said, hugging a doll Joanna once loved. "You broke this one," Jennifer told her sister, pointing to a toy Jacqueline had damaged years earlier. There was no hesitation, no confusion, as if they were remembering, not discovering. And then came the night that convinced even Florence, who had resisted the idea of reincarnation, that something extraordinary was happening. One evening, the girls were playing a familiar game. Jennifer lay down pretending to be injured, while Jillian knelt beside her crying out that the blood is coming, the car is coming. It was a reenactment of their sisters' deaths, down to the smallest detail. But how could children so young relive an incident they never witnessed? By age 5, the memories began to fade. The girls grew into entirely new personalities, and the strange recollections slipped away like dreams after waking. Many who study reincarnation believe this fading is typical, that early childhood is the only window where memories of another life remain intact. Psychologists proposed explanations: parental influence, suggestion, coincidence. But none could account for the precise knowledge, the birthmarks matching fatal injuries or the deeply emotional reactions the twins had toward places they had never been. The case eventually caught the attention of Dr. Ian Stevenson, a researcher who spent decades studying children with alleged past life memories. After years of interviews and documentation, he called the Pollock Twins one of the most convincing cases of reincarnation in the Western world. Skeptics still argue, believers still insist, but the twins themselves eventually grew up, built new lives, and left the mystery behind them, if it ever truly left at all. Yet the questions remain: how did they know? Why did they remember? And why did the memories vanish just as quickly as they came? Maybe consciousness is not bound to a single lifetime. Maybe grief opens cracks in the world where impossible things slip through. Or maybe the Pollock twins simply carried echoes. Echoes of 2 lives cut short, returning just long enough to say they weren't forgotten. If you made it this far, take a moment to breathe and get ready, because the next mystery reaches even deeper into the unexplained. On the remote Flannan Isles off the coast of Scotland, the sea is not merely water. It is a force, a presence, a mood that shifts without warning. For centuries, sailors whispered that the waves around Eilean Mòr carried voices, and that the wind there spoke in tones no human throat could form. But no story from those islands is as haunting or as mysterious as what happened in December 1900. 3 lighthouse keepers vanished, no struggle, no bodies, no explanation, only silence. The lighthouse stood new and immaculate on the cliff, its beacon slicing the dark Atlantic. Inside lived 3 men, James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. They were experienced keepers, disciplined and steady, men who knew the sea's fury and feared nothing except negligence. But on December 15th, passing ships noticed something strange. The lighthouse lamp was dark. At first, sailors assumed it was a mistake, but as night after night passed and the tower remained black against the sky, concern turned into alarm. A relief vessel was already scheduled to arrive on December 26th. What they found that day became one of the most unsettling mysteries in maritime history. When the crew landed, the island was silent. No greeting, no movement, no smoke from the chimney. The lighthouse door was unlocked, the beds were cold, and the clock inside had stopped. In the kitchen, a meal sat untouched on the table, as if someone had been interrupted mid-bite. A chair lay overturned, and on the coat rack, one of the keeper's heavy oilskins remained hanging, meaning one man had stepped outside into the brutal Atlantic winds without even putting on his protective coat. But the most disturbing clue was found in the lighthouse logbook. The entries grew increasingly strange as the days passed. December 12th. Severe winds and more than usual. Men praying. This was unusual. Lighthouse keepers were trained to remain calm under all conditions. Why would seasoned men pray over a storm? December 13th. Storm still raging. Duckett silent, MacArthur crying. MacArthur was known as a hardened man, a fighter with a temper. Why would he cry? The final entry, dated December 15th, hours before the lighthouse went dark, read only, "Storm ended. Sea calm, God is over all." But the weather records for that week show something impossible. There was no storm. Not on the 12th, not on the 13th, not on the 15th. The skies were clear. Whatever terrified the keepers, it wasn't the weather. Investigators searched the island and found signs that ropes stored high on a cliff had been violently torn free. Some concluded that 2 men went out to secure the equipment and were swept away by a rogue wave, while the 3rd rushed out to help. But this theory collapses under its own weight. Why were there no footprints leading back to the lighthouse? Why had one man remained inside without his coat? Why did the log describe storms that never happened? And why did sailors approaching the island claim they saw shapes? Dark figures standing on the cliffs, motionless, watching the sea. To this day, locals insist the Flannan Isles are cursed. The ancient Gaelic name for the islands translates loosely to the ones near the other world. Some believe the men were taken by spirits, by the sea, or by something older than both. Others whisper that the island reveals things to those who stay too long, visions, voices, and shadows that move against the wind. What we know for certain is this: 3 experienced men vanished without leaving a trace. No bodies washed ashore. No clues appeared in the months that followed. The lighthouse stood empty, perfectly intact, its lamp cold and unmoving. It is as if the island simply swallowed them. And even now, more than a century later, passing ships sometimes report unusual lights near the cliffs. Some say they see 3 figures standing where the keepers vanished. And when the mist is thick, captains swear they hear voices carried by the wind, calling out through the fog, asking for help from a place no living person can reach. Space is usually loud with chaos, exploding stars, drifting dust, cosmic radiation. But in 2003, astronomers at Arecibo noticed something different. Not noise, not randomness, but structure. A thin, razor-sharp frequency, too clean to be natural, cut through the data. A narrow-band signal, the kind only technology can create. It carried a dry, clinical label, SHGB02+14. But for the scientists who detected it, it felt like a message. The signal came from a strange patch of sky between Pisces and Aries, a patch containing nothing. No stars, no planets, not even dust clouds, just darkness. And yet, something inside that darkness was transmitting. At first, SETI analysts thought the detection was a fluke, maybe an error, maybe interference, but then the signal was picked up again and again, not repeating like a simple radio beacon, but reappearing, irregular, as if it was drifting through space. Every detection had the same unnerving traits: extremely narrow frequency, clean structure, consistent origin point, an unusual frequency drift. That drift is where the mystery deepens. A drift like that means the source is moving, not orbiting naturally, not rotating like a planet, but accelerating or shifting at a speed nothing in the region should be capable of. One SETI researcher described it as a signal behaving like a spacecraft, but coming from a place with nowhere for a spacecraft to come from. Scientists tried every explanation. Maybe it was Earth interference? No, the direction was consistent. Maybe it was a satellite reflection? Impossible, the frequency behavior didn't match. Maybe it was just noise? Statistically impossible, 3 separate detections months apart. So analysts tried breaking the signal down, looking for patterns, encoding, anything resembling language. But SHGB02+14 wasn't organized like a message. And yet it wasn't random either. It was caught somewhere in between, like a voice speaking through water, distorted beyond recognition. If it was a message, it had traveled so far, through so much cosmic interference, that we were only hearing the faintest, damaged whisper. Another theory chilled astronomers even more. What if the signal wasn't meant for Earth? What if we intercepted something mid-transmission? A communication between 2 distant points we were never meant to hear. In that case, the drifting frequency makes sense. Imagine listening to 2 distant towers communicate while you drive along a highway. Their broadcast would seem to shift and bend. Now scale that to cosmic distances. Others suggested something even stranger. The source might not be stationary at all. If the signal came from a moving craft, the drift would be exactly what you'd expect. But the nearest star in that direction is so far away that the idea borders on impossible, unless the technology involved was far beyond anything humans possess. And then, the signal vanished. No fade-out, no weakening, just silence. SETI searched the coordinates for years. Nothing returned. It was as if the transmitter moved on, or was switched off. The scientific community quietly split. Some said SHGB02+14 was simply an anomaly, interesting but unsolved. But others noticed something deeply unsettling. The signal originated along the galactic plane. The region SETI believes is the most likely corridor for interstellar communication because it is the main road of the galaxy. If an advanced civilization wanted its messages to travel efficiently, that's exactly where they'd send them. Another clue, SHGB02+14 had no modulation, no obvious encoding, but its structure was unnaturally clean. Natural cosmic events don't produce signals like that. Earth-based systems don't produce them from that direction. It sits in a perfect eerie space between both worlds, like something engineered but distorted by a journey too long for humans to comprehend. One astronomer said, "It felt like hearing an intelligent sound but one we no longer remember how to interpret." Today, SHG B02+14 remains archived in SETI's database, unresolved, unclassified, unexplained. No one talks about it publicly anymore. Funding moved on, the world forgot, but the data is still there. That thin, unnatural whisper from an empty corner of the sky, a signal too strange to dismiss, too intentional to explain, and too fragile to decode. A message without a sender, a question without an answer, and maybe a reminder that when we stare into the void, sometimes the void sends something back. The deeper we go into these mysteries, the more one thing becomes painfully clear. The world is not as simple, not as explained, and not as neatly documented as we've been taught. From vanished colonies, to children who should not have existed, to signals from the stars, to figures seen before disaster strikes, each mystery pulls at a thread that leads somewhere darker, older, and far more complex than our history books admit. And the first 10 stories barely scratch the surface. Every unanswered question becomes a doorway. Every trace of evidence feels like a whisper from the past. And every mystery reminds us that for all our science, our satellites, and our certainty, there are still places where the world refuses to be understood. But the most unsettling truth? These mysteries are connected not by geography, not by culture, but by something deeper. A pattern of the unexplained repeating across centuries. From omens to vanishing, to impossible artifacts, humanity keeps encountering things it cannot fully name. And yet we keep searching, because somewhere between what we know and what we fear lies the reason these stories endure. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to CurioBox. It truly helps the channel grow and tells me you want more. And tell me in the comments, which of these first 10 mysteries disturbed you the most, and why? Your answer might appear in the next episode. Thank you for watching, and stay close, because in the next video coming up next week, we dive even deeper into the shadows. And the next mysteries are even darker. See you soon.